Welcome all. I am Sophia Lin Lakin. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director of the ACLU's Voting Rights Project. Thank you for joining us today. We have assembled all of you here for a special briefing offering an inside look at the ACLU's work in the Battleground states. I want to first give a special thank you to everyone who made this possible, especially those we'll hear from during our program who have made time in this extraordinarily busy moment to share a little bit about what they've been working on. There is no right more foundational than the right to vote. If you care about bodily autonomy, trans justice, immigration, education policy, then whether your vote for the people who are going to represent what you care about on these issues is counted and counted equally, this is where it starts. Take what you learned today and share the importance of our work to anyone who is willing to listen. And thank you for supporting our work. In a few seconds, we're going to send out a quick poll to see where you are tuning in from. We are in a critical moment when it comes to protecting voting rights and safeguarding our democracy. In the past 3 years, in the aftermath of the 2020 election and the big lie, there's no sign of anti-democratic forces letting up. In fact, it has only intensified. Hundreds of anti-voter laws are now introduced in state houses every year as a matter of course. And in just this election season alone, we have already seen at least 130 anti-voter lawsuits seeking to block ballots from counting, force voter purges of the rolls, demand rules that would delay certification, and the like. But we have been fighting back every step of the way nationwide. In fact, since May, the Voting Rights Project has been involved in over 50 investigations or legal actions across 15 states and Puerto Rico aimed at safeguarding the upcoming election, including filing or intervening in some 17 lawsuits and sending pre-litigation notices or demand letters in another dozen. We've been preparing for this moment for quite some time, laying the groundwork on the heels of the aftermath of the 2020 election. As we like to say here, you don't need to get ready if you stay ready. And that's been our motto for some time. We made key resource and capacity investments in battleground states where we know the hardest battles are going to be waged. And from what we experienced in 2020, we knew that when the time came, we had to be ready to respond quickly and effectively to a whole range of possible threats, starting well before the first vote was cast, all the way through inauguration. So a group of experts from the national ACLU and our affiliates came together and identified 28 potential election subversion and voter suppression scenarios from registration through inauguration, and developed cross-functional advocacy, legal, and communication strategies to address each scenario. For each scenario, we've charted strategies to respond, prepared legal guidance and research, templates for legal papers that can be customized, samples from similar cases, and other resources so that we can respond quickly and effectively across the country in what will be and has already been a very chaotic time. Although our election safeguarding efforts span the entire country, we're laser focused on 6 key battleground states where we expect amplified voter suppression and election subversion efforts, including, of course, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, which we'll dive into more in depth in just a moment. Before we get started, a few logistics. The webinar is recorded. We will plan on posting it as well, so please share the knowledge and guide others in your community towards this session. If you need closed captions, you can enable that feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen under Live Transcript. We will be utilizing the Q&A function during the call, so please send us your questions. We know that the presidential election is top of mind for everyone, and today we'll be talking about how the ACLU, our communities, and all of us can ensure that all eligible voters are able to cast a safe and secure vote, and one that is counted and respected. I'm so grateful to our expert panelists who have joined us today. I want to welcome Jessica Ayoub, Field Director at the ACLU of Michigan, Athar Haseebullah, the Executive Director of the ACLU of Nevada, and Marian Schneider, Senior Policy Counsel for Voting Rights at the ACLU of Pennsylvania. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm excited to dig into this conversation with you. We have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. Voters have a lot going on for them in elections, and they also face some challenges, some hurdles. What do you think we are getting right from your perspective, and how can we do better in election administration? Jessica, let's start with you.
Thanks so much, Sophia, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. As Sophia mentioned, my name is Jessica Ayoub. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the field director at the ACLU of Michigan, which means in that role, I spend a lot of time thinking about Michigan's election administration. So to give you some context on what Michigan is doing well, I want to take us back in time just to give a bit of context for how we got here. In 2016, the presidential election in Michigan was decided by less than 11,000 votes. And when we started looking at the reasons why that margin was so small, it became abundantly clear that it was our voting rights. Michigan had some of the most restrictive voting in the country. And so we decided that if we ever wanted to create the Michigan that was truly reflective of the voters in our state, we needed to overhaul our election system. And so in 2018 and again in 2022, Michigan put two citizens-initiated amendments on the ballot: Promote the Vote of 2018 and Promote the Vote of 2022. And these amendments, common sense reform Michigan's ballot accessibility, like instituting no reason absentee voting, creating same-day voter registration provisions, and recently creating a mandatory early voting period. It also put important protections to ensure that our elections are certified based only on the effect of votes cast. And important, in 2018, Michigan voters also passed a constitutional amendment that created an independent citizens redistricting commission, which has completely changed the way that districts are drawn here in Michigan to prevent partisan gerrymandering. And so now in 2024, Michigan voters will have more options than ever to cast ballot, and we are working hard to make sure that we continue to see record voter turnout this election, and that all Michigan voters know and understand their newly won voting rights and can access the ballot. But that work is far from over, and we've of course made really great progress to curb the voter suppression efforts that we've seen taking hold since 2016, and to continue the great progress we've made since 2016. And so now we're setting our sights on passing the Michigan Voting Rights Act, which will place Michigan at the forefront of a national movement and strengthen democracy for everyone in our state. It would be one of the most comprehensive state voting rights acts in the nation, and it's passed more important than ever as we see the Federal Voting Rights Act come under pretty relentless attacks. We have seen voting restrictions take place all over the country, and we believe and think that passing the Voting Rights Act is going to be an important layer of protection in Michigan for voters and will help combat this rising tide of voter suppression. I know that was a bit of a mouthful, but I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues to talk a little bit about what this looks like in their states.
Let's go to you, Athar. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, so for those that don't know me, my name is Athar Haseebullah. I'm the executive director for the ACLU of Nevada. I'm an attorney by background, grew up right here in Nevada, hometown kid, went to college and law school in DC. I prosecuted for a few years in New York, moved back here some years ago, and have been heading the ACLU for a little under 4 years now. And during these last 4 years, we've seen significant changes with respect to voting rights law here in Nevada. We are doing a lot of good. We're continuing to work towards things, and I'll kind of break down what I think some of those highlights are, and I'll share what some of those challenges are in our state as well. I will say our state, Nevada, we are not a huge state, so I see a couple Nevadans in the participant or attendee category. Big shout out to you for joining us. But we're a state that really values individual liberties. And because we value individual liberties and there's a strong slant towards civil libertarianism, sometimes it allows us to proactively engage in approaches that we think increase those rights for all people. That includes voting rights. And we have worked as an organization, as an affiliate in Nevada, on a series of different issues during the last 2 years, really during the last 4 years, to make sure that voting rights are protected for all people. That does not matter what their political party is. It doesn't matter what their political ideology is. We want to make sure that this is good for everyone. And the way that we've done that is multiple fold. We have brought litigation forward that we thought was valuable and important. A couple of examples of that were in 2022, we actually sued the city of North Las Vegas to make sure that an appointment, which should have been an election, was actually conducted in the form of an election, so a judicial appointment wouldn't go through summarily. We thereafter pivoted into other issues, including monitoring Nye County's paper ballot and hand counting process. Nye County's a smaller county in Nevada, but engaged in that process without really having protocols in place. So we had to bring litigation forward to make sure that the law was being followed. Since then, we've had to bring other challenges. An example most recently was we brought a challenge against Elko County. That's another one of our smaller counties here. But the reason why we brought it was we passed a piece of legislation, Assembly Bill 286 here in Nevada, that allowed people who were detained in jails to be able to cast their vote. These people have not forfeited their right. They haven't been convicted of a crime. So obviously they have that right. We passed that bill into law. Our governor Republican governor signed that piece of legislation into law to ensure that. And we've had good results since. The Clark County Detention Center had over 40 people who were pending trial cast their vote. In Elko County, they quickly, which didn't have a process involved for establishing that right, they quickly reached out to us once we brought litigation to settle that matter, and they did. And they adopted a policy as well to make sure that they were compliant. Most recently, we brought challenges. One of my favorite challenges was against Nye County, again, for failing to allow for observer protections, regardless of political party, because we think everybody should have the right to observe elections as well, and to make sure that elections are fairly administered and our democracy is widely participated in. The bad and the ugly are just as challenging. We're seeing an unprecedented number of threats to civil liberties, including challenges to purge ACLU members from the voting rolls within 90 days of the election occurring in violation of federal law. Shouldn't have ever been brought forward. We had to go through approximately 33,000 names to see which individuals were in fact impacted. And when we had members that contacted us and said they didn't know if they were being subject to us, and we verified that they were, we took action and intervened in those cases as well. But it just goes to show you that the challenges that are involved are always new and always rising. And a lot of times they're not even rooted in logic. They're just rooted in an attempt to show that there's something being done by national conservative proxy groups to effectively involve themselves in the election, even if it's not good faith efforts when it comes to litigation. I'll kick it back over to you, Sophia.
Thank you, Athar. A lot going on. Let's go to you, Marian, in Pennsylvania.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marian Schneider, and I'm the Senior Policy Counsel for Voting Rights at the ACLU of Pennsylvania. And as I'm sure you've seen, all roads of the Electoral College lead through Pennsylvania. But we're going to, in Pennsylvania, we've embraced the concept that the best defense is a strong offense, and we've gone on the offensive in litigation. However, I'm not going to talk about litigation because there's so many other things that we are doing that make election administration better in Pennsylvania. So first of all, the law is more settled than it was in 2020 because of the constant litigation that has happened, but also of the county advocacy that we and our coalition partners do. So because of the work that we're doing, some counties are making it easier for voters to return mail ballots. The majority of counties are alerting voters that there are disqualifying defects on their mail ballot envelopes and giving them an opportunity to correct those errors in advance of Election Day. We, the ACLU of Pennsylvania, did public records requests of all 67 counties in order to develop an interactive map on our website that shows everybody what the county that you live in Pennsylvania is doing for notice and cure. Also, coalition partners and the ACLU have worked on advocating for increasing language access, and that has resulted in the Department of State translating even more materials into 9 additional languages besides English, Spanish, and Chinese. I do want to talk about the mobilization work we've done in the counties, because we have our rapid response is now a well-oiled machine. We have a rapid response toolkit that we can use to drive people to boards of elections meetings. And we've done this in Lebanon County, Dauphin, Allegheny, and because of that, there are ballot drop-off locations in Lebanon. The affectionately referred to ballot barn. We have drop-off locations in Dauphin County and a notice and cure procedure. And in Allegheny County, our second largest county, there are now satellite election offices and ballot drop-off locations. So all of that is the good in Pennsylvania, and the bad is the mis and disinformation, and especially around nuisance litigation that is being filed across the country, not only in Pennsylvania, and the press is covering it as if it has some merit, and it has no merit. So that would be the kind of litigation that seeks to throw voters off the voter registration rolls that Athar was talking about. The biggest challenge that we have is that our legislature, if it were functional, could fix many of the problems that we're having in election administration, but we don't give that. We're not giving up, because we're taking it county by county, and those efforts are paying off. But we can always do better. But we will continue to make sure that every valid registered voter's vote will count. So let people vote.
Let people vote, indeed. That was a lot. Now let's turn to our next question. How are each of you seeing voting rights intersect with our other fundamental freedoms? Athar, this time, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Voting rights are foundational and fundamental to all and every individual right that exists. In Nevada, we have strong referendum processes by which voters can directly participate in our democracy. We also have a representative form of legislative governance and lawmaking. All of our judges in the state of Nevada are also elected. So in Nevada, I'd say maybe more than any other state I've lived in or in any of the places where I'm licensed to practice law, there's a direct emphasis on ensuring the right to vote, because nearly every right we have is impacted at its core by voting rights, and things can quickly change here. An example of that, we have a series of ballot initiatives to amend the Nevada Constitution coming forward this November. In order for voters, regardless of what their position is, in order for eligible voters to make sure that they're able to participate in that process, we have to first make sure that things like they're being excluded from the voter rolls when they're valid voters, or they're being denied access to cast a ballot through any other subversive means, are mitigated against. And that's really the role of the ACLU. Access to voting in Nevada impacts things like the consideration of a constitutional amendment here in Nevada, question 6, to enshrine abortion rights into our state constitution. It's currently an elevated statutory right that passed through referendum, but not in our state constitution right now. There's also a voter ID ballot initiative that's being considered here. That'll also be on the ballot. There's a question to remove our Board of Regents from the state constitution right now and allow legislative oversight of these items. So all of these intersect with voting rights, foundationally speaking. And when we look at something as basic as justice court seats here in the state of Nevada, which oftentimes deal with landlord-tenant issues and evictions, when we're in the midst of a crisis when it comes to rentals, homeowners not having enough ability to effectively, well, let me rephrase, not enough available housing here to ensure that we have a vibrant enough pool of available and affordable housing for our population. We've seen an influx of evictions that have occurred. And so each of these items is impacted by voting rights, and we view it as a privilege to be able to step in to intervene to protect these rights on a consistent basis.
Thank you, Athar. Marian, how about you?
Well, I echo Athar's sentiments that the right to vote is foundational. and underlies all other rights. Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, we do not have a citizen ballot initiative, so we aren't able to go directly to voters who can then vote their values on various constitutional rights. But the one thing that is not so unique to Pennsylvania, but not every state does, is we do elect our judges in Pennsylvania. And the judiciary has an incredible impact, of course, on ruling what the law is on other rights. And so we, in 2020, our judges are elected in odd years, and we had a Supreme Court justice seat that was open in 2023. And so those are the kinds, in those kinds of races, the ACLU can encourage voters to vote along your values. What are the values that are important to you? And what candidate is on the ballot that aligns with those values? And so that I think elections matter in so many ways. We vote every 6 months in Pennsylvania, and some of those local elections are what I call the quality of life elections. Does your street get paved? Does your trash get picked up? How often does your trash get picked up? Who gets to hire law enforcement in your community? Those are the kinds of issues that directly impact the lives of voters, and so that's why voting is foundational to all these other rights. But I'll stop there.
Co-sign all of that. Jessica, what's going on in Michigan from your perspective?
So again, with what Athar and Marian both shared, but I want to dig in a little bit to a couple of Michigan specific examples that I think really highlight what we've been talking about. So in 2022, Michigan became the first state in the country to pass a citizens-initiated constitutional amendment to protect abortion access. A victory like this was only possible because of the changes we made to our voting system back in 2018. Because Michigan voters had more options to cast their ballot in 2022, we saw record high voter turnout among almost every voting bloc. And unsurprisingly, that held true for young voters and student voters. It was this voter turnout and the record high rates of folks turning out to vote that really propelled our constitutional amendment in 2022 to victory. And one of our favorite stories to tell from this period is that at the University of Michigan, there was a student who waited in line until 2 o'clock in the morning to cast their ballot for reproductive freedom because they registered to vote on the same day and then were in line by 8 p.m. and could stay in line until that ballot was cast. And so that was only possible because in 2018, Michigan voters voted to allow same-day registration. But also, 2022, Michigan saw for the first time in decades, voters elect a pro-civil liberties state legislature, which was thanks to, again, more accessible elections, but also because of the work that our independent redistricting commission did to redraw our maps so that they were fair and reflective of these across Michigan and reflected the will of voters. We have seen time and time again that when voters have the option to vote their values, they vote to protect their rights. And we're proud that we've created a blueprint that's being used across the country. We saw this model work successfully in Ohio. We're hopeful it's going to work in states like Nevada and Florida to ensure that voters can really meaningfully access the ballot box and vote their values, as Marian said.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Let's turn to the next question. I talked a little bit earlier about the ways that we've been preparing for the threat scenarios that we might encounter this election cycle nationwide. But I want to dig a bit deeper into what you all have been doing on the ground. You've touched on it a little bit, but with so much at stake, can you talk a little more about how you've been preparing to safeguard voting rights and the election and the tools you've been leveraging, whether it's litigation, advocacy, education, or another strategic tool? Marian, this time I'm going to start with you.
Well, thanks, Sophia. As I mentioned, the ACLU of Pennsylvania has been playing offense on the litigation front because our legislature has not clarified the rules around what we call mail voting, which is essentially no excuse absentee voting. So mail voting is relatively new in Pennsylvania. It was adopted immediately before the pandemic. It was not a pandemic measure, contrary to if you might have heard other other notions of that. And the procedures around how to submit a mail ballot have been the subject of litigation. So what our Supreme Court has said that these things are mandatory. There's 3 errors that could result in a mail ballot not getting counted. If you don't have the secrecy envelope, if the voter forgot to handwrite a date on the back of the envelope, and if they forgot to sign. So we have been trying to get the court to rule that the enforcement of the date requirement violates Pennsylvania's Constitution, as well as the materiality provision of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The federal case, we did lose in the Third Circuit, but we are pushing forward on the constitutional claims. And we have one case still percolating up through the appellate process. But we also have been trying to get clarity on when you can vote a provisional ballot, which is completely separate, statutory required option for voters. And so it's kind of mail voting adjacent. And we also have a challenge under the Pennsylvania state constitution that asserts that it is fundamentally unfair for counties to know that they will not count a voter's mail ballot, that they have set that ballot aside and stuck it in the do not count bin, and that as a result, the voter's ballot will not be counted. It is fundamentally unfair for them to know that and not advise the voters, tell the voters. That violates the procedural due process guarantee of our state constitution. So there's only one other thing I want to mention really quickly that we're doing to protect. We need to know what shenanigans might happen at the county level after the election. And so we are running a very robust program for volunteers to monitor the official computation and canvass of ballots, which starts the Friday, no later than 9 a.m. on the Friday after the election. And in that way, we will see if there are any shenanigans, and then we will be ultimately prepared and thoroughly prepared to meet those challenges. I'll stop there.
Shenanigans, the official term of this election. Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, in 2022, Michigan voters did the Michigan Constitution to expand ballot access. And one of the pieces that was included in this constitutional amendment was language clearly stating that the role of the Board of Canvassers, which is the body who certifies Michigan elections, is non-discretionary, and that elections must only be certified based on the official record of votes cast. So when a major Michigan newspaper quoted a member of Zoo County Board of Canvassers, which is in Southwest Michigan, saying he would not certify the 2024 election if it unfolded as it did in 2020, our legal team sprung into immediate action. We filed suit against Officer Robert Froman, and the case was resolved just about a week later. And as part of that resolution, Froman signed a sworn affidavit saying that he will certify the 2020 election results in accordance with his constitutional duty. Following the resolution of this suit, we sent a letter to all counties in Michigan reminding them of their constitutional obligation to certify the election based only on record of votes cast, and that as a legal powerhouse, the ACLU of Michigan would be watching to ensure that their constitutional obligation was upheld. This was a really important tool in our tool belt and a message well in advance of November that the ACLU is watching and that the ACLU is prepared to ensure that all votes count in Michigan and that our elections run smoothly, safely, and securely, and that we are not going to tolerate any shenanigans this election cycle. So this is something that we are really, it was a really innovative approach that we are we're excited that it resulted in the resolution that it did, and are looking forward to continuing this advocacy into November.
Awesome. Athar, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, look, Nevada is not the largest state. We don't have the biggest bar. It's I practiced in New York before and practiced here, and there are gaps, right? But gaps also provide opportunities. We've been able to carve out significant lanes in different spaces, and this is one of the areas where we've carved out the biggest lane when it comes to protecting voting rights as lawyers. Our Voter Protection Alliance, as we've dubbed it, which is our signature election protection program, is going to be the largest election protection program in the state, period. Through a combination of non-attorney volunteers and attorney volunteers, we will be staffed with attorneys and non-attorneys in all 17 of Nevada's counties. We are prepared to litigate in every single county if an issue comes up. We have been referred to and referenced numerous times as being potentially overly aggressive. And we never apologize for that. We double down and embrace that. We are litigious. That's my view of why I'm here, is to be litigious and to make sure that people's rights are protected. So if anything should happen that we think undercuts democracy, if voters are denied access to being in line, if they're denied the ability to properly observe as they should be according to what the law permits, if there are any shenanigans like that occur by anyone for any reason, we'll be looking to potentially challenge those rules and the improper enforcement of what might have been a voter rights protection, but has been converted into something that's far more nefarious. We've also seen concerted efforts to misapply and misuse laws, which is part of the reason why we've had to intervene in different places on different issues throughout our state. I think because we are staffing in all 17 counties for the election, and because we will have the largest presence there, regardless of what the political parties are doing, the ACLU stands at the forefront of being able to make sure that there is a fair and free election that's administered, that there is confidence, which there should be in our election system, but that we don't run into a scenario where it's never-ending unanswered questions in a state that really hasn't provided as deep of a body of law that should exist. So we know and can anticipate some of the issues that are coming forward, but for the ones that we can anticipate, we're ready for those as well. We think that in collaboration with our national office, with our partner organizations, and with people that we serve throughout the state, we have members everywhere throughout the state, that we have a good pulse on everything that's going on. And because of that, we feel well prepared heading into this election.
Thank you to all of you for all the work that's being done. As we like to say here, we will see you in court. So to your point, we talked a little bit about this, but let's talk a little bit more about how you're working across communities to prepare for Election Day and how supporters can get involved in the fight for voting rights. Jessica, I'm going to start with you this time.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. So for the past 2 years, the ACLU of Michigan has had of 4 organizers working in communities across Michigan that are at the greatest risk of disenfranchisement. And in these communities, our organizers have been working to build productive and collaborative relationships with Michigan's clerks, who are the folks who administer our elections. And as part of this work, our organizers have been working to build teams of local volunteers and advocates who can work directly with their local clerks to improve the accessibility of our elections. In some communities, that looks like working with a clerk to establish a satellite voting location, or working to improve signage that outlines accessible voting options. And really, the objective of the program has always been to create community-specific solutions to community-specific problems. Importantly, though, that work becomes a little bit trickier as we get to the election because clerks are busy. And so a little bit. We are still working with clerks and talking, but we're focusing in on some of those really rapid issues that a clerk might need help with, like they're short on poll workers or something like that. But we're also recruiting volunteers to be nonpartisan poll challengers who will serve as our eyes and ears on the ground during Michigan's early voting period and during Election Day. Challengers are going to be on the lookout for issues that pop up at voting locations and report those into our election protection hotline so that we can solve those as quickly as possible. And we're also working with volunteers to observe election canvas. We'll be working to recruit volunteers in about 8 counties across the state where the threats to a smooth certification process are biggest and where it's hardest to recruit volunteers. Those communities, our volunteers are going to be observing the canvas proceedings and report back what they observe so that we can intervene if there are any concerns that the certification process disrupted and respond accordingly.
Thanks, Jessica. Athar, let's talk about what's going on in Nevada.
Yeah, look, many of the issues are carrying over. I feel like you can probably copy and paste. It's like a Control-C, Control-V type of scenario when it comes to the issue each of our states is facing, right? And that's for a multitude of reasons. I don't think that's for one specific reason. We're always going to see misinformation and disinformation about what happens, but there's also just a real desire and a need for people to have their voice heard right now, which is really important. We want to give people always that opportunity, which is why we run this program. It's why we have established this gigantic volunteer program, why we're putting lawyers to work when it comes to the election, why we're not just looking to protect, people who might have the same views on certain issues as we do when it comes to things like observation. We think everybody should be able to freely observe an election. That's a key cog in this equation. So we think our collaboration with partner organizations to address issues, whether that's certification timelines, whether it's the unlawful attempt to purge individuals from voter rolls within what's an obvious violation of federal law. Much of the litigation that's brought, it's sad to say this as a lawyer, but much of the litigation that's been brought to attempt to suppress the vote is something that most attorneys wouldn't even view as serious litigation. Their attempts, again, to make it look like something is being done, but obvious and blatant violations of federal law brought in state challenges would preempt the ability to do it. Some of the cases now have court dates beyond Election Day. But what it does is it creates this sort of distrust that something's up, there's a challenge. For instance, on the purge attempts, why weren't these purge attempts done a year ago? And why you dropped 30,000 affidavits to try to get people removed from the voter rolls a month before the election, instead of doing it 6 months or a year ago, or even 120 days ago when it would have been potentially federally compliant, even though there would have been issues there with respect to personal knowledge. So we think we're ready to go here. There's always going to be a place for everybody in the ACLU's movement towards protecting individual liberties and rights. And I'll also say for individuals who are, again, don't share our views, they're oftentimes our best sources of information for what's happening on the ground. They will share information readily with us because many of those individuals also don't agree with what's happening. They'll also recognize political opportunity and opportunism for what it is and share that information that's helpful to us. For our elected officials and for the clerks that are working and for our poll workers, we always try to make sure that we have a professional approach in dealing with them. We don't need to be hyperbolic in terms of how we move things. We do want them to know that we're there and we're present, but the main thing is that the right to vote remains protected, and we're looking forward to doing that in about 3.5 weeks now. It keeps getting shorter and shorter, which is probably causing some of us some level of anxiety as well.
Thanks, Athar. Marian,
So
how about you?
Thanks. I want to talk about 2 things. First of all, the election, we also do a robust election protection. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, but that's just a single program among our broader voting rights work. And election protection specifically refers to the hotline and the work that's done on Election Day. But we do, as I mentioned before, all of our voting work in coalition. And one coalition that was stood up to directly address the threats to our democracy is called the Pennsylvania Voters Decide, PA Voters Decide Coalition. And we have developed scenarios and response plans across a variety of functions: legal and litigation, election administration and policy, communications, and there's mobilization, and even the mobilization is divided further according to geographic regions in our state. And all of those plans are in place so that if the scenarios we've anticipated arise, we can spring into action. On the election protection front, we partner very heavily with Common Cause and All Voting is Local and Pennsylvania Voice. Common Cause is responsible for the field program, and they are recruiting hundreds of volunteers to be poll monitors at polling locations across Pennsylvania. We have almost 10,000 polling locations in Pennsylvania, but we won't cover all of them, but we'll cover the communities in which we invest in the populations that live there. But ACLU is also recruiting tons of volunteers. We have on-call attorneys in our target counties who can run to court if we need them on election day. We have volunteer attorneys that can go and do factual investigation and get witness statements if we need it, in addition to the official canvas monitoring that I mentioned before. So, and we will run 2 statewide command centers, one in the east and one in the west, that we divided up the county so that we can escalate and address and try to solve problems in real time on election day. So I just, the ACLU Pennsylvania support role is really the litigation backbone, the legal advice and backbone to our coalition partners. When they encounter problems in the field, we're there to help them solve them. So, so we are doing our best to anticipate and be ready for anything that gets thrown in our path on November 5th and beyond, because the election's not over till December 11th.
Good reminder. Well, thank you so much, everyone. The work you've outlined today really shows how much thought, partnership, strategy, synchronicity there is across this work. It's not just happening in one corner of the state or in one state, but in every community. It's so impressive. And I know I speak for everyone here when I say we are in the best hands ahead of this election. With that, I'd like to move into our audience Q&A now. I know some questions have been answered as we've been going along, but we still have a few. We know that there are many pressing questions, and if you have a question you didn't already ask in the chat, in the Q&A, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen now. So first question is for Jessica Mishkin. The question is, the ACLU is doing great work in protecting all of our voting rights. Are there any efforts to reach out to the uncommitted voters to actually validate your hard work by having them vote for a name actually on the ballot for president?
Almost like you knew that this is my favorite question to answer. And it was the stuff of nightmares for many, many months that me and my colleagues thought about. But I'm excited to say that for those who don't know, in Michigan's presidential primary, there was a major movement for voters to vote uncommitted in the presidential primary and select neither major. When that happened, we were very proud of voters for accessing the ballot in the way that felt right for them and casting the vote that aligned with their values. Because as a nonpartisan organization, we do not endorse or oppose candidates. But when we learned about sort of the impact of the uncommitted movement, it got us thinking about the need to really ensure that voters across the state understood what was at stake in this election and how to access their voting rights. And so back in July, we launched what we have been calling our voter motivation, which is targeting the voters who are at the greatest risk of feeling really apathetic or disaffected by the state of the world and by the state of just everything happening globally. And so this program is targeting voters ages 40 to ensure that they understand sort of that their rights are on the ballot this election cycle, that they understand what their voting rights are, and that they have more options than ever. And so for the past couple of months, we've been running a series of digital ads and mail pieces to educate voters not only about their voting rights, but also the issues that'll be on the ballot and important races that are on the ballot as well. so that they understand that there are things like the Michigan Supreme Court race up on the ballot this year, so that they have the information they need to make an informed decision.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is for Marian. Has the state cooperated with Election Day and post-Election Day protective measures, or do you know of any in place in Pennsylvania?
Well, we certainly believe that the Department of State is trying to prepare itself and all the counties for any threats to democracy. I mean, they don't share everything with us, but we do have quarterly stakeholder meetings, and we do have a pretty cooperative relationship with the Department of State. So I think they have done scenario planning, disaster planning. Certainly, we have talked to them about legal issues that may come up just because we are in so many cases together. So I think that the short answer is yes, that the state is preparing and that we tend to cooperate with them more often than not. We don't see eye to eye on every issue, but I can say pretty with confidence that they take these threats seriously, and that there's a commitment, at least in this particular administration, to make sure that elections are run smoothly and fairly, and that there are not undue barriers to participation.
Thank you, Marian. Athar, next one's for you. What specific problems with voter suppression or vote counting may occur in Nevada this year?
That's an interesting one. I guess it's, again, I mentioned this to somebody earlier. I hate to use a Nevada-based pun, but guessing which challenges may pop up is like playing a game of roulette. At this point, you just put down 36 or more options, spin the wheel, and guess which one you're going to land on. But we do know that a couple are certainly likely. We know certification issues will end up occurring. That's a guarantee on the back end of the election, just because of the way our Nevada Supreme Court punted decision-making on the issue. We did not agree with that decision. We thought if they were going to make a ruling with respect to certification after our June primary, where there was an issue that brought its way to the Supreme Court, they should have done it then and just given everybody clear guidance, whether you're on the left, whether you're on the right, regardless of what your views are. Going into an election with clear guidance as to what the law is going to end up looking like makes things a little bit easier. So we know that's almost certainly going to be a point of litigation afterwards. We're ready to go on that. Mass voter challenges, as I mentioned, are a big one. We don't think that there is any lawful basis for a court to consider the challenges that have been brought forward, where, again, thousands of individuals, which includes our ACLU members, were basically suggested to not be residents of the address that they were listed with, and there was an attempt to purge them from the voter rolls in violation of state and federal law. So we know that that's going to be another issue. But from another standpoint, we think that there could be any number of other traditional voter suppression issues that might end up occurring. That could mean that there is threat set specific voting sites, which would prompt a requirement to extend voting hours. The consistent challenge of having seasonal workers in these positions, are poll workers who work really hard, but have different levels of training and different level of deployments, could be hard in terms of uniform application of rules. So we know, at least at the forefront, a couple of those issues exist. And that's not including other things that end up popping up. One of the more annoying things that end up happening in Nevada, a little bit of wonky technical tea, but I'm assuming that the majority of people on this call will probably appreciate that to some degree, is that we have somewhat strong electioneering prohibitions within a specific zone here in Nevada. Almost every election, candidates generally come forward and break these rules. They enter in the zone, they engage in the process of electioneering, they start a controversy, it yields a whole hoopla. Oftentimes law enforcement will end up being called out because there ends up being a controversy thereafter. It'd be great if everybody could just follow the law and be respectful to poll workers, and if you want to settle issues, settle them in court. In a civil way. Court's an adversarial process, but it doesn't always have to be a nasty process. So we know at least a few of those issues are going to pop up. I will say, I'm going to go ahead and apologize for Nevada in advance to probably everybody on this call. I'm imagining, just based on what the certification litigation will almost certainly end up looking like, you're not going to get official results from Nevada and an officially certified election that first week and a half of November. That's why I think many of us are concerned, and probably many of the battleground states are like, you know, at least we're doing our parts, but like, hope it's not my state, right? So I'm hoping Nevada does not end up being the last state to certify, but we'll see what happens when we get to that standpoint in litigation.
Thank you, Athar. This is a little bit of a bigger question. How have recent the Supreme Court opinions regarding the Voting Rights Act, gerrymandering, and the role of state government in elections had any impact on voting rights in your state? If they have the decisions and the current Supreme Court makeup affected the way you are approaching voting rights in the event of appellate challenges after the elections? Anyone want to hop in there? Marian's off mute, so.
Well, I'll just say that certainly we think very carefully before we file lawsuits in federal court. And when we have strong protections under state constitutional law or state statutory law, we try to limit our cases to those areas. And this has been done. I mean, I've been in this space for 20 years, and the first case that we did this in was in 2006 in the voting machine case, and we did it again in the voter ID case in 2012. So we are very cognizant of the hostility of some federal courts to voting rights. That said, our opponents are always waving those cases in front of us and threatening that they will go up there and that there's an independent state legislature theory, but I think we have been able to rebuff them. I'll note that Pennsylvania was not the subject of any of the federal cases to date. That doesn't mean that some will not rear their ugly heads, but I don't think that it definitely affects legal strategy, and the cases that we filed are evidence of that.
Thank you. And we're getting close to the end, and I just wanted to end because there have been a few questions for each of you about how people can get involved, who they can reach out to on various efforts. And I want to give each of you a chance to shout out a number or an organization or an email address or the like, and we'll put them in the chat as well. Jessica, I'll start with you.
So they were dropped in the chat, but we have dropped our volunteer sign-up pages. We are texting and calling voters every day until the election, and you all of our options directly on this first link in here. Also, as I mentioned, recruiting nonpartisan poll challengers. And so you can sign up partisan challenger, and then we will follow up with you almost immediately to get you trained and signed up for a shift. We need challengers to work the early voting period, to help out at the absentee ballot counting boards, and at the polls on election day. And then finally, we need folks helping us observe the canvases after the apps, and so need your help to sign up to observe canvass proceedings, or to community if you're willing to travel with us, to help make sure that the canvas runs smoothly.
Thanks, Jessica. Athar, what about in Nevada?
Yeah, well, look, first and foremost, we're always appreciative for the support of funders, donors, and supporters within our network here in Nevada, and those from other places that give to our organization to be able to protect civil liberties and civil rights throughout the state of Nevada. When it comes to this issue specifically, outside of the financial support somebody might be able to offer, we're always open to taking volunteers. If you go to our website, it lists it has the link listed to be able to sign up, whether you're an attorney or a non-attorney, to volunteer with us. We put you through the training ourselves. And it's really what that looks like is it's actually quite high level, where, again, the goal for election protection is not to increase tensions, it's to decrease tensions. It's to be able to answer simple legal questions that pop up, to make sure that people's rights are protected in that way. And so we always have volunteer opportunities that are available in that way as well. As I mentioned, we will have the largest election protection program we've ever administered. That's a lot of fun. It will probably, again, be extended past election day. We're planning on going past that because there's going to be all types of challenges that end up occurring afterwards as well, which we're, as I mentioned, prepared for. So the final way that I will share, you can Be sure to support the ACLU of Nevada. If you are not going to be able to contribute in that way and or sign up to be a volunteer, we will accept your coffee contributions mailed directly to our office. We do enjoy coffee. We are powered by coffee. And to the degree anybody has some sort of magical reserve supply, we will gladly accept that here in Nevada.
Thank you, Athar. Marian, what about in Pennsylvania?
So there's so many different opportunities. The best thing to do would be to email, and I think Marissa's going to drop it in the chat, is vote@aclu-pa.org. But for poll monitors of the Election Protection Coalition, I also, hopefully there will be a link dropped in the chat for Common Cause. Common Cause is coordinating the volunteers for the poll monitoring, and they're also, you can sign up there and also be a fact investigator for the ACLU. So those are the two links. Oh, and then yeah, the let people vote. Thank you, Marissa. So if you try any of those things, I am trying to run down the CURE program. We may not have a coalition-based CURE program. That may be another organization that's doing that. So I will try to run that down after this webinar.
Well, with that, thank you to the panel and to all of you for joining us in this really important conversation. What I heard today from all the panels is that we can achieve tangible, positive outcomes for voters, but we need to act. And so with that, we are going to send out one last poll. I think that's been sent out to see how you're going to get involved. We hope that you are all inspired to jump into action with us. Thank you again.